Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome back to the next instalment of your online learning experience for Health and Wellbeing Level 3 at Te Waiōhomai Institute of Technology. So this week we're going to look at and explore the nervous system. I'm going to take you through the nervous system lecture. Vicky's going to take you through some videos on common conditions related to the nervous system. Then there's going to be some quizzes to follow and a few video resources that might help you in solidifying or reinforcing that learning. So again, feel free to watch these videos as many times as you want, engage with the other resources, and if there's any questions you can direct them to your tutors. So let's get stuck into it. So by the end of the session today, we're looking to be able to label the different parts of the nervous system, explain the function of the nervous system, so the overall function, and then describe how each part of the nervous system or each organ in the nervous system carries out its function. So covering those areas of anatomy and physiology, both structure and function. Okay, the nervous system consists of the brain, the spinal cord, and a network of nerves that are found through the entire body. So much like the cardiovascular system and the blood vessels, the nerves are apparent in every single part and every single organ of the body. Shares many characteristics with the endocrine system. They act together in a lot of ways. They're messengers. Obviously, the endocrine system sends chemical messages. The nervous system sends electrical impulses or messages. Generally speaking, endocrine responses aren't as fast, and the nervous system works a whole lot faster, but the effects aren't as long lasting. So obviously there's areas or functions within the body where one communication system works better for that particular function. Okay, it has a wide variety of functions. They include relaying messages, triggering muscles, so innervating muscles or telling them to move, responding to the senses. So obviously we've got messages coming from sensory organs back for the body to interpret as well. Thinking, our ability to have conscious thought, helps our memory, so the axons or the neurons in the brain help us store information. They carry out automatic reflexes, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail as we go through. And they give us the ability to analyze information and make judgment. Okay, so that's just a rundown of the basic functions overall of the nervous system. We're going to break that down a little bit as we work through the lecture. So the first part of the nervous system, that is the functional unit. Okay, so like in the urinary system where we talked about the nephron is the functional unit of the kidney, the neuron is the functional unit of the nervous system. Okay, so these are cells of the nervous system. There's a picture down below of what they look like, and we're going to break that down and talk a little bit about the function as well. So it has billions of neurons which carry impulses. Impulses are responsibility for the majority of functions that our body performs. So it'll tell all the different organs within our body what they're meant to be doing at any given time. They occur in variety of sizes and can vary largely in a length ranging from a fraction of a millimetre to over a metre long, so depending on where they are in the body and what system they're associated with. Okay, the structure when we break it down, this is the type of thing that you will need to know to be able to label a diagram similar to this. for your assessment in this section, so for the online quiz. So understanding that the cell body and the nucleus are at one end. Obviously remembering the nucleus, going back to our cells, contains all the DNA, the information, and is the brains of the operation, so tells the cell what it's meant to be doing. The cell body contains any of the organelles that are required within the nervous tissue, and the dendrites, which, as we go through, we'll understand form an important link between neurons, or help to form an important link between neurons. The axon, which is the projection that goes, the long projection that goes out of the cell body and acts as a conductor for the nerve impulse. And then you'll talk about as well axon terminals, which along with dendrites will allow neurons to pass or relay signals on to one another. So if the neuron isn't going straight from the source to the intended recipient of the message, an impulse may travel over multiple neurons. So what it more likely looks like in the body is something like this. So you can see these neurons lined up or organised in a way where there is a little bit of a space between them, so they're not physically touching. But when a nerve impulse or a message comes along one neuron, so from the cell body through the axon down to the terminals, the axon terminals, there's a gap there called a synapse. When the nerve impulse travels along there, it triggers a chemical release from the axon terminal that then signals the dendrites in the next neuron to then continue sending the message. Okay, so that sounds like a bit of a laborious process. It obviously happens very, very quickly within at a cellular level, so that those impulses can travel particularly quickly. Okay, so now we've talked about the functional unit that kind of makes up most of the nervous tissue within the body. We're going to now talk about classifying that nervous tissue and the different jobs that each of those tissues have within the system. So split into two main parts, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So central nervous system, as we'll see moving forward, consists of the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, only those two things. Any nervous tissue outside of that is considered the peripheral, made up of the brain and spinal cord. So the brain lies within the skull and controls most of the functions of the body. The spinal cord is a continuation of the brain, and it lies within the vertebral column. So a lot of, and we'll talk about further down the track, if something's got to travel all the way back up to your brain to be processed and then to process a response, that's much slower. Some things like reflexes only go as far as the spinal cord and then back out to the muscles to make them happen much more quickly, but we'll explore that as we go. The spinal cord is protected by the vertebral column, so the spinal cord goes down the center of the vertebral column. So obviously those bony structures give us some protection for that particular tissue. So if we talk specifically about the brain, you'll see in the picture there that we've got between the brain and the soft tissue, and the bones of the skull, there are three different membranes called meninges. Okay, you just need to be able to know the name and to label them on a diagram like this. In terms of assessment, you don't need to know too much detail outside of the fact that they offer protection. So the dura mater, which is the most superficial of the three, the arachnoid matter, which is in the middle. The name comes from what it looks like when you put it under a microscope. It's not kind of shown here, but and the pia mater, which is the deepest of those protective layers. So these three layers of the meninges protect the brain and the spinal column. So the 3 layers also form a continuous covering over the spinal column inside the vertebral column or the spinal cord. Okay, the spinal cord itself divided into 2 main parts. Grey matter. So this is the picture there, and it's a bit gruesome. So they've taken cadavers and kind of sliced someone's spinal cord. So physically what it looks like, we've got grey matter and white matter. The difference is grey matter contains the cell bodies and the dendrites, and the white matter contains myelinated axons of neurons. So the axons that take the impulses, myelinated just means that they're surrounded by a layer of fat, and that helps conduction. Okay, it extends from the brain down through the spinal canal, which we talked about. The vertebral column protects it. Surrounded by extensions of the same 3 layers of meninges. Again, we talked about that. The subarachnoid space, so that is the space between the meninges and the brain and the spinal cord, provides cerebrospinal fluid. So that's fluid that surrounds the brain and the spinal cord, and again offers another layer, another level of protection from the outside, so that when we are running around, climbing, jumping, doing the wonderful things that we like to do, obviously if we didn't have our brain sitting in fluid and our spinal cord sitting in fluid, then it will get a lot more damaged than what it should. Okay, so it just offers a little bit more protection. Spinal cord consists of millions of nerve fibers, transmit electrical information between limbs, trunk and organs of the body and the brain. Okay, so it's so all the messages come from the brain down the spinal cord, and then the nerves that carry the information, they go out from the spinal cord and then take the messages out to all the different parts of the body. Okay, the nerves that carry information from the body back to the brain or back to the spinal cord are called sensory neurons. So that's where we get our information. So information from our eyes and ears and touch and temperature sensors in the skin. Motor neurons go from the spinal cord to the body, and so they are the ones that take the messages telling us to do stuff, like if something's flying towards my eye, then it'll tell physically the muscles in my eyes to contract, so I blink so that doesn't get in there. Okay, so that kind of covers the central nervous system pretty well. We're going to move on now to the peripheral nervous system. So basically the nerves connecting the spinal cord and the body are referred to as the peripheral nervous system. So that's everything else apart from the spine and the brain. So they connect that to all of the other organs and muscles and tissues in the body. Deliver sensory information, also known as afferent. So, like we said, that's information that comes from the body back to the brain to be processed. And the motor division commands the peripheral tissue, so it tells them what to do. Okay, so it takes messages. So just remember that the sensory nervous system, that system that coming back towards the brain. The motor nervous system is information going from the brain out to the body. The peripheral nervous system can also be divided into the somatic and the autonomic. And we're going to explore that a little bit further in the slides to follow. So the somatic nervous system controls skeletal muscle contractions. Voluntary, so most are voluntary, for example, moving around to pick something up. Some are involuntary or subconscious, for example, like moving your hand away from something that's hot. And this type of automatic response is also called a reflex. Okay, so within that somatic nervous system, that controls skeletal muscle only. Okay, so not smooth muscle, not cardiac muscle, just skeletal. Mostly that is voluntary. There are some aspects of that are involuntary, and that is where we move into what's called a reflex. So, in a nutshell, it occurs rapidly, and it's a pre-programmed response. So the sensation that comes back from your sensory nerves to the nervous system doesn't go to your brain. It only goes as far as your spinal cord. Okay, so knee-jerk reflex. Sensory receptors in the tendon of the knee go, oh, something's hit that, we need to contract the muscle to protect it. The impulse goes through the sensory neuron to the spinal cord. From there, back out through the motor neuron, so the quadriceps muscles contract, and they cause that twitch, or your leg kicks up if you hit that tendon in the right spot. Okay, you can see the pictorial representation of that there. The key about this is that it happens faster, okay, because again, it only goes as far as the spinal cord. It doesn't have so far to travel. It is a pre-programmed response, so we don't think about it. So other examples of those reflexes, withdrawal, pupillary reflex, so obviously where the pupils in your eyes dilate and constrict. Blood pressure, so this constriction and dilation of blood vessels to influence blood pressure. And blinking reflex is also another one, another example of that. So all of those things, there is a pre-programmed response to a stimulus that happens without involvement of your brain. So it goes straight through that reflex arc as far as the spinal cord and then back out. So there's no processing, there's no conscious thought when it comes to that stuff. Your body just goes, this is important, we need to action it straight away. Okay, so that's the important thing to remember about reflexes. So this diagram shows what happens when a reflex takes place and you step on a pin. When you get the receptors, the sharp object touches the receptors, the nerve endings send information to cells in the spinal cord, bypassing the brain. Spinal cord processes the information and sends impulses that moves the muscles and lifts the leg so that it happens quickly. Okay, because it is, these reflexes happen most of the time when there's impending danger. So something's sharp, something's hot, something's not as it should be, and so then your body's got to act quickly and not send the information all the way to your brain, because that would slow things down. Okay, and then would have, that'd be a less than desirable situation. Okay, so we're going to talk now about the autonomic nervous system. It can be divided further, and you'll see in the next slide how these all kind of fit together. Again, for me, the visual thing is quite important in terms of understanding. But the autonomic nervous system is divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic is our fight or flight. So that's the system, the nervous system that gets activated when we're in situations of danger and we need to either stay and fight or run away. Okay? So activated during periods of stress or when you feel threatened. Prepares you to confront or flee. Usually short-lived, and increases things like heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature, airflow through airways, so you're ready to take action. Okay, so back in the prehistoric days, it'd be, walk around the corner, hey, there's a T-Rex, I need to run as fast as I can so I don't get eaten. This is the nervous system that would get you out of there. Or if it was something maybe a little bit smaller that I could fight off and maybe take home into my cave for food, then it would prepare me to stand and fight. Okay, so you'll hear it commonly talked about in relation to fight or flight. Parasympathetic, feed and breed, so that's the opposite, that's the contrasting one. So most active during quiet, non-stressful conditions, has a calming effect on the body. And those are the times when we're if you talk about circadian rhythms and sleep cycles, our rest periods during the day where your body needs to rest and recover from the damage that you've done to it during the day. Important regulating digestion and reproduction. Can be activated in situations perceived as hopeless. Okay, so yes, unfortunately, then bringing on things like uncontrolled urination, defecation, fainting. Probably see that more in animals than in humans, but worth a mention. So, in summary, okay, so this is where we kind of link it all together. There's a lot that's been talked about, and there's a lot of words that'll be kind of floating around in your brain right now that you may be struggling to make sense of. Here's where we break it down into, and you can see how it all fits together pretty well. So nervous system works with the endocrine system to control the body. Okay, so remember the endocrine system sends chemical messengers, the nervous system sends electrical impulses. So the nervous system works much more quickly, but the endocrine system has much more longer lasting effects. So again, they have different jobs within the body, but they work complementary of each other. Nervous system has two main parts: central nervous system, brain and spinal cord. That's an easy one to remember. Okay, so in the center, brain, spinal cord, that's the brain, that's where all the action happens. Peripheral nervous system, all of the nerves that come out of the brain and the spinal cord that supply the rest of the body. Okay, so those are the two main areas of the nervous system. So as we move down the kind of hierarchy, the peripheral nervous system, we can again break into two different parts. So one being the somatic nervous system, whose only job is to control skeletal muscle. Okay, remember we talked about that being mostly voluntary, outside of the reflex actions that we also explored a little bit too. The other part of that is the autonomic nervous system that controls everything else. So things like our regulation of our breathing and our heart rate, and any of our kind of organ functions, any of our, so the dilation of your blood vessels, all those kind of things that we don't physically have to think about, are regulated or controlled by our autonomic nervous system. So they don't require input physically or kind of mentally from us for it to happen. It just happens without us having to think about it. Okay. That autonomic nervous system, and we talked those last two things, we talked about the systems, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Sympathetic being fight or flight, parasympathetic being feed and breed. So those two separate parts, so you can see how the hierarchy there kind of works and is broken down. So, you know, the first two there are pretty easy to remember. Somatic and autonomic, you may or may not. So somatic, skeletal muscles, that's all you kind of need to remember there. Autonomic controls everything else. And then understanding the difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic. So the way I remember it, parasympathetic, parachute slows things down. So that's how I remember that is the feed and breed. That's the one that happens when we're chilling, when we're relaxing, when we're recovering. Sympathetic, yeah, that's the one that fires everything up, gets your heart rate up, gets the blood pumping, gets the releases the cortisol, all of those kind of important things that we need. The stress response to deal with things there. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up at this point. Like I said, feel free to go back and review these. There'll be so 3 videos I think Vicky's put together, each on some conditions that relate to the nervous system. There's a couple of quick quizzes, so the quizzes are only a handful of questions, so jump in and do those to help as well. And like I said, go back and revisit this as many times as you want. There's a couple of video links that I'll put down here as well with some really cool visuals that might help you help you conceptualize and visualize what's going on within the nervous system a little bit better. But feel free to engage in some of those other resources as well. So yeah, for now, ka kite anō, until next time. I will see you again soon. Stay safe out there and be kind. Ta ta.